Today I'm just going to go through one of the trades I took the trade I took this morning, something a bit different. I just wanted to go through everything in sort of a more detailed sort of view. Just on oil's breakdown this morning, my sort of thoughts throughout the whole trade itself, and just sort of different structures, footprint, self-talk, and some live execution of just sort of the end product and sort of what I could have done better throughout sort of the whole thing, and didn't plan out the best way I thought it might have done, but just sort of a few different things where I could have done better, and just my whole thought process and sort of approach behind it. So sort of coming in from yesterday, how we finished yesterday, sort of how we closed and how I came in this morning. I always have a look on the train to get a picture in my mind of what's happened sort of overnight. So a few things that I'd do is ask sort of these sort of questions potentially beforehand. So yesterday I had it in mind. I had it, sort of the structure we had. The train this morning, I'll have a look, sort of what action you're going to be getting. So going back from yesterday, sort of what price action we got. There's a lot of absorbing going higher. The market sort of struggled to go higher, and then the cash market come down and sort of close, and you sort of get, sort of one of the big doji hammer looking candles. Where sort of your access is going to be, when the trade's like being different than what you expected. But like today, it's sort of more of a move down, sort of like that, instead of the sort of what I thought of possibly more of a straighter line move without such sort of deeper pullbacks, etc. How aggressive you want to be, passive, sort of like I was saying, using that tipping point sort of tool, and once it gets past here, you don't even hold all your size, you don't want to be getting out. What is there you can lean on, as in footprint, volume, you get risk on, risk off moves. Just what the general setup, is there any themes in the market? Is the one at the moment? Currently, not necessarily. I think this week in general, the market's done sort of their own thing, especially after the S&P coming off yesterday. Gold's going much higher. Oil's not really doing too much either. So there's sort of things that you'll ask, I specifically ask myself as in a setup throughout the whole morning in general. I mean, if you don't have any structure in your head from the day, prior day, or the bigger picture, then, you can sort of ignore that. But it was something I've just noticed plenty of times before. So this is yesterday's cash profile, and this is, just put today. So yesterday, sort of again today, you could possibly have that sort of like island reversal sort of thing where and we start to open below here. But yesterday you got the open and close in these places. You've tested up, and you had a previous high here, which we failed at, and you sort of leave this sort of like 45-degree angle where you sort of then build the value back here, and you just sort of hold above this sort of area. So me then thinking today, as long as we haven't traded back up higher and sort of done this, I prefer if it will stay sort of in sort of this zone, and we sort of close in here, and you sort of then got more of I would say a heavier bottom, and then you can trade down back through. And I was sort of thinking there was just sort of general target for the whole day, but overnight we sort of traded slowly sort of through this area, and I'm still thinking you can still then, you had sort of a low at this point, yesterday's low, and then obviously we slightly sort of grinded below that. So I still felt like you can trade straight through there, sort of still be aggressive in my own opinion. It's not the best looking sort of profile, so I feel like you could trade necessarily that point out. This was sort of what I was looking at on a bigger hourly time frame. This was the previous high I was looking at. So coinciding with both of those, the fact that we failed and then we've come back off, and you sort of created sort of a castle looking thing, and you sort of have that sort of support there. Once you break back through, I was just looking at sort of these two lows, then they sort of coincide with those sort of highs. So that was the sort of general picture I had throughout the day, throughout this morning. Just putting those two together. So then I go from a daily perspective, then an hourly, 15-minute, and then sort of that picture then creates sort of a different type of picture. Again, more inside, you've got these all lows. You get that sort of overnight bit where we've failed really to sort of show any acceleration down. Then you get one test lower, and then it sort of bounces. And I was sort of thinking this morning whether if that's going to fail and come back in, if we hold sort of back above this area, then I think you could sort of drift back up for sort of this afternoon. But that was sort of what I was thinking, and then it's sort of the awareness of what I didn't have still having the belief that you can still then trade, back lower by selling much higher. I didn't start selling to about this point, just because it's sort of more of that questioning and where you can possibly get in. This move we got this morning was much faster than this move, so I had more my size on the slower move, where you're willing to keep trying to hold I would have preferred a bit more faster, but I think that's where you've got the overnight people that are trying to, buy this with the support you've got and possibly play sort of the break of that, and so you've got a sort of bit of a flush out maybe, for that buyers couldn't take it sort of much higher. So that's sort of how I'll break down sort of my trade, or this is afterwards, but before that, that's how I was generally looking at it. And this is from this morning. So just the footprint structure of how this happened was this morning that you sort of had this zone here where you had the faster move down, delta and volume's pretty good in that rotation, and then sort of the sort of delta change sort of thing you had was another high volume with the opposite amount, 500. And I started to sell in this. I had a bit of sort of the FOMO feeling that you had a fast move, you're only going to pull back and then go down again. So I started to sell, I think I sold 15s and I think somewhere up here, sort of 20s. And you could sort of tell that as soon as I sold here, you could see, so that's the white boxes in each of these are sort of the VPOC of those areas. You could sort of see that you're not getting any trade back down. This then I sort of felt, well, you possibly could be wrong, and then you get the bid back up, sort of when you had all the way through sort of when it happened, the PMIs were happening, and sort of that can generate a little bit more volume back to the upside. So when we come back down to this area, you don't want to see that buyer in this zone again. Some more sort of question I was thinking, how can I sell this much higher? Sort of, it doesn't necessarily give you you want a bit more up the top. This sort of what traded up and then come back off. And I was sort of thinking in this part, when you start to get back below here, is this going to bounce? I question myself probably too much again, which is I do too often. Am I right? Am I wrong to sell the low of something? I prefer to try and sell higher and then not necessarily selling the low of a candle necessarily. But then I start to sell. First start selling at 22s, and something else I've never really thought of before is you've had the rotation at this point is nearly 30 ticks or 25, 30 ticks. So at some point you might think you're possibly going to get a 10 tick bounce to create a new rotation. That doesn't happen. So I'm aware of the possibility that you're going to get this at some point. So you might sort of get the squeeze, which I was expecting at some point, which eventually we actually never got. So again, this is the key area. So once this starts selling here, it took a bit of time to know when I was right, and sort of held 18s, 19s. And I just remembered from this morning that the key zone really, not necessarily selling the low, you want to sort of be selling at the price where the buyer was this morning, I felt. As soon as that's gone, there's no reason why I don't think you can see new low, and this can keep, tumbling as much as you sort of like. That was sort of my plan. It was just the way that the market sort of changed from this morning, then where I felt like you could sell wherever the low was, say here, you can sell and it's just going to sort of straight line. You've had to sort of evolve to how the market's changed throughout the morning. And I was a bit dubious of, being aggressive into this sort of area where I start to sell, I think, 8s, 9s, I think 14s as well. Just being careful that you was getting sort of a lot of, say, 5-ish rotations, 5-tick rotations. You never got more, I'll show you on the Renko towards the end of that, you sort of had a 65-tick move, about a 7-tick pullback. This is something else to sort of lean on and just really watch the price action as specifically as you can. And this was sort of the aftermath of it. Again, you're sort of always getting there are buyers are always willing to just sort of absorb it on the way down. So I was always worried that you will get this squeeze here, or even at this point, but eventually you sort of got it a bit later on. This point at the low, you did have a 200 lot as well, which eventually you bounced straight back off, but you'll be able to see that towards the end on the bit of execution. So that's how I was sort of thinking of just using your analysis of what else you can sort of use, just by bits of, up here it was quite harder to sell. I felt like your area was sort of the 30s, 35s. This area, as long as the buyer's not there, you can see new lows, and the problem is they're always willing to sort of pick it up, so it made it hard to hold. So this was the 5-minute overall. So this was sort of yesterday's move. So this was, inventories was the high, then eventually we come off and we sort of created this sort of support. We say you hold it overnight, we sort of make our way down. That was yesterday's low. So as we make your way down, this is what I was sort of looking for, to the break of these where everyone's long overnight. So my sort of thought process again was, I had the FOMO in here, I'm going to miss the whole move, where I wanted to have all my size on for this break. I start to sell in this point and you get squeezed out. If I zoom into a 1 minute, and I can show you a bit more in this area. So I did start to sell here, as I mentioned, and then you had that big buyer where you sort of have the sort of VPOC nearly of the day sort of around here, that high volume area. And then coming a bit later on, I sort of ignore all this. I feel like, well, if this is going to trade back up, we're going to go back up, and we sort of fail up here. Then you sort of get this area where I'm always wary of, what would happen is either you're going to go up, if we're going to go up for the day, you're going to bounce here and we're just going to trade back higher. So that was what I was thinking. Until we got through here, sort of have like this low volume point of the day, and I'm thinking, well, we're going to have to sort of auction this out a little bit, flatten it out a bit. We didn't necessarily do that as much, but how then can I get a position on then? We're going to then break lower and we're going to sort of keep going. As you can sort of see throughout of this part, your rotating is not much really going on. You're not getting that, like this morning we got where they're just straight lining here. It's more of a churny move all the way down. So I was aware of that. Also, just on how, just the different awareness of trying to get in. I mean, like I say, the time to sell was here. I'm not selling until sort of in this bit. So I sell probably quite early, and then you're sitting through the bit of this and then trying to sell on the way down, and then trying to understand how to be, say, aggressive, which I still felt you could be. But I should have been using better thought process and a better awareness to sell this higher and still have that picture in my sort of your brain, and also using sort of leaning on other things like Delta on this pullback. Delta doesn't really go anywhere, and then we start to go back down on this move, and then as soon as we start breaking new lows, Delta comes off even a bit more. Volume does pick up again, sort of what you got here on the highs with the volume pick up, and then the Delta comes straight back down, and then volume picks up. So they're the sort of things you can possibly lean on to keep yourself in all these different types of areas. And this is what I was saying about the Renko just before I get into the price action, is you get the move down and then you get this move back up where Delta doesn't necessarily move too much. 48 tick pullback, and then you had this down move of 65 ticks where it's a 3 ticks, so every 7 ticks it pulls back. You'll have a green bar, say, and that's how much volume we traded down. So you trade 27,000 on the way down over 65 ticks, and you had a bit more volume on the upside, but then delta on this was much better. As soon as we start to get to this point, delta starts to come off. So these are sort of things, as we're trading sort of down towards this area, I'm thinking, well, if this is going to keep going, we're going to straight line a bit more. Just going to watch this, and then as soon as it creates a green candle, get something out, which is basically what I did towards the end. And I'll talk through sort of how I managed to manage this morning. I'll play and 2 times the speed also, just because it's just from this sort of point, as it was quite slow as well. It will take quite a bit of time. What we had, I just want to go from this point, just because it took, like I say, quite a long time, sort of 45 minutes or something like that. So I started positioning here. So obviously, what else I had in mind, you had the PMIs as well. So you had S&P and gold. They were both sort of had that risk on, risk off scenario, or risk off, should I say. So SPU wasn't really moving, but as it came off, gold might have gone a little bit higher. Same with, the Bund as well. But as I was saying, going back to this, just I was keeping an eye on those at the same time. You had much more going on in sort of this market. I felt like all we were doing was sort of rotating here in between this area. So I was always, willing to scale out of something. And there was always something like bit of size at the bottom. So you had that 100 lot. So again, just different bits. Again, we're coming back up. There's bits of size that came on the offer. It's just small little pieces of price action that I'll stick my mind to, especially with this sort of 70, 80 lot here. We had that 100 lot at 9s. So as we're coming back down, I'm always wanting to see the size be taken out to sell more exactly. So just small things that I'll keep an eye out for is that as long as the size is coming down, I know this is 2 times speed, so it looks much faster, but it was a lot slower. So it makes it much more difficult to do. So once the size is gone, etc., as long as we're still selling, you get the 80 lot. As long as we're not, this is quite key here. You had 80 and 80. As long as they weren't getting taken out, I was willing to, sell more. Now that 100 lot comes back on, we're not really going anywhere. So this is okay. So there, we took it out, and then we trade in here. So then I'm willing to then puke a little bit if we go higher. So that point there, when it traded 80 lots higher, that's when I was a little bit worried. And then obviously we come off a little bit, we hold that 80 lots comes back down. Then I tried to scale out, because I think like we're gonna scale much faster. But just if I pause that quickly and I'll go back to normal, I'll show you the normal speed of once we broke and how sort of harder it was. So as we broke through here, I still felt like as long as we don't go back sort of above 7s or 8s, then I think we can keep going. And what I was doing was I started to panic when we were in sort of this zone. So when you're trading above 01s, you had 140 lots here, and we've held above. I was slightly concerned of how it was going to do, so I started to scale out quite a bit, quite quickly, quite aggressively, which was not the idea. I felt like if we're going to keep going, the volume I felt was pretty good at this point. As long as this 50 double O's goes here, I feel like then we can keep trading down. Like I say, eventually we have 200 down at 90s. So this was slow. I mean, I know I put it up as 2 times speed, but it looked much faster. But if you think about putting it in half and how slow it did take, it sort of took quite a long time where I was sitting with, you know, four, 6 or 8 lots and just only on side. All I was thinking about was at some point this is going to have sort of a 10 tick bounce, and then I'm going to get squeezed out, and then you're going to have to reposition again. So that's what I was always aware of, that 50 tick rotation down we had. At some point there was going to be a bounce of 10 ticks. You know, how many people are now selling this that you're going to get that quick sort of bid back up? That's what I was, you know, mainly aware of, especially when you're into the low and you know, basically full size on the trade. I was always concerned that you're going to get that. But again, here I've scaled out of half already. That I'm still trying to run this to see what the sort of how much volume we're going to get when we trade down to the lows. Again, it's slow. It's quite painful to sit through, and it doesn't really. It's doing the same price action as what you got before, which I should have been more aware of. Is what's going to happen before is ideally it's probably going to continue the same type of price action you're going to be getting. Nothing really should be changing. I shouldn't really be getting out of anything at all at this rate, because you know you're not wrong, and you know something like I think I showed a while ago is that I started to scale out too aggressively when you know you've just got your size on. Again, it sort of picks up a bit, doesn't really want to just go, and it sort of does the bids up a little bit. Again, you just want to see the size come down, you know, especially when you get 80s and 90s, 100s. And it's not biggest size in the world, but you want to see it be taken. You don't. It's sort of somebody always is willing to buy this on the way down. Again, you don't want to see 2, 3s lots traded. You want to see more of your 30s, your 50s plus. But someone's always willing to buy this all the way down. Speed it up to towards the end. Yeah, I'll just go 2 times towards the end, just so we get down to this 90 lot. So I'm still willing to sort of run this all the way, sort of the way I was thinking still, like I'm still right, you know, don't need to panic. I know I've cut most of my size by now, but you know, it's sort of not the whole idea. You should be sort of doing that. So in the end, my target was sort of 72 and 60 really. I know it's quite a big move to have in the sort of the, you know, pre-cash, but again, eventually we did this morning get there. So it was sort of one of those where it goes down, then it pulls back, and then goes again, then pulls back again, then goes back down. So again, I'm still just trying to run this as much as I can at this point. Eventually I come back to 1, and then I try and run, well, I was going to run, like I say, 72 and 60, trying to just see some size come down. If the SPOO come off a little bit, maybe that might flow into the oil and then gold. So at this point, these two are happening, then you do get that extra bit of, you know, momentum that comes in, and that fails. So at this point, I'm thinking, well, we're gonna, you know, this is fine. So you do get that second sort of flow again. Just other things to be aware of. Then the Renko's still going, so you're thinking of that. The footprint still looks good. So again, it's just all these different types of things to try and keep into play. So when it starts to speed up, I'm quite aware, you know, this is fine, and then it sort of, I try and get out. And so it does that where everyone starts to chase the selling, and then they start to get out. And then this is what I was noting. I felt like this point here, if this doesn't get taken the first time, then I'm willing just to, I just think I'll just get out of that. If there's no willingness to sell more size lower. Eventually we do get down there. I just wanted to see show you how it trades into it, and it gives you sort of quite a quick bounce in the end, or it holds and then bounces. But you would want to see this get taken out quite quickly, which was my sort of preference of it. And again, we rotate back up. Again, you see the SPU and gold are trying to go a bit lower slowly. So that's what I mean. You just want to try and have something else to come into play. So what else can you lean on? If this wasn't happening, what else can you lean? You know, like I was saying, the Renko, etc. When you continuation or you move an average, etc. All these different types of things, trying to keep yourself in the trade. Where, you know, in hindsight, looking back, I should never have necessarily got out of the trade at all. This is where I think, in thinking back about it, I'm just sort of trying to hope now that this is going to go all the way and test that. Now you've got out of everything, sort of, you know, from 99s to say 04s, where in hindsight you don't necessarily need to, you just need to give it the more patience. Just because you've got your size on doesn't mean you necessarily, I personally don't have to need the reason to get out straight away. But there's all trying to keep yourself in and understanding that small bits of price action you take a bit more time to notice, especially for me this week. That's what I've done. A few good trades where I've just put the position on and just left it to go, not with size, but just to run the position to see if you're right. And again here, we only trade 59 into 90s and you bounce quite quickly. That's just what I wanted to show you. Wanted to see that just get taken. For me personally, I mean, I know it's taken some, but you don't want to see it bounce too high and then come back, which is basically what we have done today. You want to see it sort of stay here and then offer back down, but we sort of hold the 94s and then we bounce. And I decide to sort of pull the trade, shall we say. But on that sort of note of how, you know, if he asks us the questions, you know, did you trade it okay? I think I did. I think I probably, you know, say worry a bit too much on how you want to get out of the trade, etc. And, you know, want to make something like I think I put in here is don't just panic thinking you've got to, you know, make something. Just, you know, maybe it's been a slow week like it has been. You want to have quite a good day or something like that. Put your size on. It's the only time I put size on all week. You want to make it count. You know, when there's a little bit more to be taken, when you're just not doing exactly what you think. You know, if you're selling much higher, you know, you make you know, something good out of it there. You're trying to run everything. That's the idea I had in my mind, that you've gone down, pull back, and then are we going to go straight away? Is that sort of energy there? Not necessarily. You've got buyers picking it up. So it's just, I think scaling out was okay, maybe just not all at such a similar price. Just try and take that out slowly. So some more things I could have done better. I think be more aware a bit earlier. Again, selling that 30s area, which I think was the first point. Just to understand how you want to execute and exit the trade. Again, sort of getting out of the trade, the price action that we had, how you want to be scaling out when it's fast, when it's slow. You know, trying to, what else was there? Yeah, execute and sort of being aggressive or being passive into zones. You know, being aggressive into the low, was that my plan? Yes. So again, you can sort of tick that off, but then if you're executing poorly where you're not doing that, or why didn't you do that? I was specifically trying to focus on what small pieces of price action where a bit of size was coming in, or there was hundreds, or, you know, a bit of size following the market and trying to push it lower, etc. So those sort of things. Again, leaning more on your idea, holding your size, trying to use like directional trade charts, sort of your Renko, your moving averages, small rotations, keeping yourself in. You know, having the selling, but buyers are willing to hold up. So that's where you're going to get that sort of two-way price action on the way down. Having better patience on the fact that you're correct, where you should leave it alone on using that tipping point. So I felt once through the low, I think this was perfectly fine. I did that, but then I panicked a bit. I didn't need to be doing that. I need to just be patient, understand that the price action before and after were the same. Not to doubt yourself, not to doubt your idea, because I felt like this morning when I had a bit of the FOMO missing the trade, I was forcing the second point because I think this is going to go a million miles. And then possibly I think a lot of what I do is when I talk myself out of being aware or being aware of something happening, that's what I do, but I think I'm just going to be forcing the sell or forcing the buy by selling at higher or lower or selling lows, etc. That's where I sort of go wrong, where I doubt myself by forcing myself to trade, if that makes sense. So I shouldn't doubt myself, and then don't feel like you're forcing and over trading specifically when there's nothing to be worried about on that specific trade or in general. And the panic thinking again, just when you need to make something, you don't need to, just stick to your trade idea and sort of forget the P&L, sort of how much you're up, down, whether you got full size or 2 lots or 1 lot on or 100, etc. They're all the same. So I just think of it that way. They're the sort of things I could have done better. So I hope you all sort of enjoyed that into sort of more of an in-depth look on how I went through this morning. Just going back from profiles, I look at the daily, look where the weekly charts, values here or there. Just divulge into something smaller where you had that sort of, the hourly structure, go into the 50 minutes in that area, pick some zones you want to play out from there, and just sort of all different types of things to keep yourself involved. Smaller time frame, execution points that have a bigger picture on that front.